Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight's story is a bit of a doozy, involving giant submarines, nefarious plans, and having your evil science nemesis make things personal, which is really quite irritating. As you remember, I had just rescued Bradley and Dolores from the fake ancient temple ruins on the nefarious Professor P's hidden fake volcanic island lair, and as I had filled them in on everything that was happening, I managed to finally put most of the pieces of Professor P's nefarious puzzle together. And I really didn't like where things were going, and there were still a few pieces missing, but I could see the general picture the puzzle was making, and it was not a pretty one. We took an electric cart down the utilidor from the fake ancient temple ruins back to the fake volcanic lair, and made our way to the submarine dock, where I knew everyone would be. Now, all the science challenges were ruses, but with purpose, and I wondered if Professor P knew the location of my missing mentor, Professor Sampson, after all. But, as I said before, I had to take the chance when accepting his 3 science challenges, but I certainly don't like being duped into participating in the evil machinations of the infinite science cabal. Now, whether I was a knowing or unknowing participant, it didn't matter in the end. I was tricked into helping make something terrible, and I would need to set things right. My ex-wife Julia was in the mix on these endeavors, as was my mysterious ally Chef Chet, who kept sending me cryptic and not-so-cryptic messages in my lunch. I just wasn't sure if, during the upcoming chaos, they would both either be assisting us or be needing assistance themselves. I suppose I would find out soon enough. The kidnapping of Bradley and Dolores had complicated things, or so Professor P had thought. But the irony was, he had made it that much simpler. Generally, when a villain kidnaps someone close to you, it is a sign of desperation. While he did send his top evil science cabal executives, Dapper Science John and Professor Roughhouse, the kidnapping was transparently more for show, which in turn pointed me to the truth, and in addition gave me 2 extra allies in my fight. Now, there's a lot to discuss. I will tell you all about Professor P's mysterious and nefarious plans. Then I'll tell you about confronting Professor P and his minions, learn who is still needed rescuing and who didn't, and maybe give you some lessons on how to thwart your own nefarious evil nemesis, if you have one. Yeah, it's a lot, I know. But first, I want to talk to you about a few things. First of all, we want to thank you again for all your support and for being here and listening to our stories. It's much appreciated, and we are also warmed by all the wonderful and supportive reviews you've been posting. And remember, there are 2 types of shows in the podcast high-speed show feed. There are the regular episodes, such as what you're listening to right now, and Professor Atwood's Sleepscapes to give you more adventures per month. These sleepscapes are pulled directly from my adventures, with all the music and the sounds we collect on our journeys. We then remix and remaster them and make them longer, so you can create your own adventure in your mind as you settle in and drift off to a nice sleep. Now, as always, don't forget to rate and review the show and maybe post about the show, because that's how other adventurers find us. And if you want more info, merchandise, and some social media handle things, as well as some donation and ad-free Patreon subscription options where you can get a little bonus content and some irregular journals, you can always go to whitecatentertainment.com. All right then, let's get back to the story. But honestly, this is one of those times where I'm not even sure where to begin. As I said before, when we exited out of the utilidor corridor and into the submarine bay, things were even a bit worse than I had imagined. My submarine, the O2, was indeed still there, but it was in the process of being raided with the hatch open and the wet system from the Getty Museum already on a winch and moving towards the biggest submarine I had ever seen. It even had a deck for takeoff vehicles like an aircraft carrier, and that's when I knew all of my theories were indeed correct. Professor P noticed us. He was supervising everything with Julia at his side as Dapper Science John and Professor Roughhouse continued their work of stealing my custom submarine propulsion system. "So, Professor Atwood," Professor P said condescendingly, "you figured out my plan." "I did," I replied, and I said confidently, "I'm here to thwart you." Professor P laughed and said he would like to see that. But he then added, "Oh, but first, tell me how you figured it out." Now, I reluctantly admitted that I had indeed figured it out a bit late, hopefully not too late, but nevertheless, I did figure it out. Now, as I said, I was always suspicious of Professor P's motives, and he deliberately kept me off balance with distractions and red herrings, so he did his best to hide the truth from me. He even admitted it. "I did my best to hide the truth, that is true," he said. "Yes," I added, "the truth about you building an amphibious minion coastal assault submarine." Professor P smiled and said, "Not quite." He said, "Thanks to me, it's a green amphibious minion coastal assault submarine." Beware of my own success, that's what Chef Chet had warned me about. While I may have succeeded in the 3 science challenges, those successes enabled Professor P to complete his end goal, the Green Amphibious Minion Coastal Assault Submarine, or GAMCAS. Let's just say I was definitely better at naming things. Anyway, the 3 science challenges were a ruse, like I said, and the first one, building a lava lamp, was curated by my ex-wife, Julia, to get me off my guard and to make me think I would have an ally in these challenges. Then I would be more amenable to the next one. But the fact remained that I did have an actual ally in Chef Chet, who had been warning me and steering me in the right direction this whole time. It was clear Professor P did not know about his true nature, otherwise he would have been captured and presented to me as another reason to gloat. But Chef Chet wasn't there, and I had hoped he had received my note from the fake ancient temple ruins. But I was a little concerned by his absence. I hoped he was okay. Well, I also hoped for a few other things in that moment as well, but Deus Ex Machina aside, I think we were on our own. Professor P agreed that was the initial plan, with Challenge 1 being easy to lower my guard, but admittedly, I was still suspicious, so he tried a different tactic for Science Challenge number 2. He goaded me and appealed to my ego and scientifically competitive nature. That time, well, it worked. I was irritated and successfully goaded into an unusually difficult science challenge, creating a hovering minion personal transport vehicle that ran on remote power. Now, I succeeded, of course, in the challenge, with exceptional minion safety parameters to boot. And these weren't minion personal transport vehicles after all. They were personal assault vehicles that could launch from the GAMCAS and hover over the water to invade coastal areas. "Correct again, Professor P said. But Professor P's smile faded a bit and said while I did complete Science Challenge number 2 successfully, he thought I needed a little more motivation for Science Challenge number 3, hence the kidnapping of Bradley and Dolores. But this is where things not only became more personal, As if using my ex-wife against me wasn't personal enough, but more on that later. So I knew there was more going on, and I just hoped I had uncovered things in time. But judging by the scene in front of me, that was still to be determined. Dapper Science John and Professor Roughhouse were still moving the Getty's hybrid WETS propulsion system on a winch towards the Gamkes. It was slow going, as the minions were doing most of the labor, and Professor P, of course, didn't want anything damaged. The kidnapping was a sign of desperation, and I knew it, and it pointed me to the fact that my success on the science challenges hinged on something bigger than the challenges themselves, which it did. And again, I've never seen a bigger submarine. Well, at least not on this planet. Anyway, while I was suspicious, my hands were tied a bit. I had to complete the science challenges to find the location of my missing mentor, Professor Sampson. Whether or not Professor P would honor official Scienceville and Science Challenge rules was another matter, of course. But I had to take that chance. The goal from the beginning was for Professor P to get his hands on the Getty's hybrid WET system to power his Gamkes and to power his personal minion assault vehicles. It could be expanded and built to scale and could be incorporated into the minion assault wireless power transfer system. But Professor P, Dapper Science John, and Professor Roughhouse and his minions couldn't get through my security system as it was based on a customized, completely random symbol-based encryption. But I had given him the tools to raid my own submarine when I created a program to unlock the digital lock to the kidnapping lounge, where I freed Bradley and Dolores. Professor P had hacked my hack, and then hacked my own encryption on my own submarine with my own hack. But again, I had no choice, as it was an official science challenge that I had to complete. I had figured this all out as I was reunited with Bradley and Dolores and debriefing them. Once it clicked, we were able to come back to the hidden volcanic lair from the fake ancient temple ruins by underground utilitor corridor, thus surprising Professor P at the submarine dock and not in his main control throne room or whatever he was calling it today. I looked up at my ex-wife Julia standing next to Professor P and asked her how she felt about all this. She struggled, and it looked like she wanted to respond, but couldn't. Professor P interrupted and said, "Enough of this banter," and he did a cliched science villain wave and said loudly, "Seize them." I will say it's been a while since I've had to resort to actual combat, especially with minions, but I was ready. I pulled out my custom umbrella number 6, the force field umbrella. Now, there was one member of my team that was more than ready for physical combat. Dolores smiled and assumed a martial arts fighting stance. As a mercenary and security officer, she was always ready. I could tell she was well trained in martial arts just by her stance. Now, of course, martial arts has a large and colorful history, but some of the highlights came to mind as we were about to be swarmed by minions. By definition, martial arts are codified systems and traditions of combat practiced for a number of reasons, such as self-defense, military and law enforcement applications, competition, physical, mental, and spiritual development, entertainment, and the preservation of a nation's intangible cultural heritage. The concept of martial arts was originally associated with East Asian tradition, but subsequently the term has been applied to practices that originated outside that region. The term martial arts was popularized by mainstream popular culture during the 1960s and 70s, notably by Hong Kong martial arts films, most famously those of Bruce Lee, during the so-called Chopsaki wave of the early 1970s. The term martial science, or martial sciences, was commonly used to refer to the fighting arts of East Asia, or Asian martial arts, up until the 1970s, and the term Chinese boxing was also used to refer to Chinese martial arts until then. The traditional martial arts that cover armed combat often encompass a wide spectrum of melee weapons, including bladed weapons and polearms. Such traditions include eskrima, silat, kalaripayat, kobudu, and historical European martial arts, especially those of the Italian Renaissance. Many Chinese martial arts also feature weapons as part of their curriculum. Sometimes training with one specific weapon may be considered a style in its own right, especially in the case of Japanese martial arts, with disciplines such as kenjutsu and kendo, sword, bojitsu, staff, and kyudo, which is archery. Traditional Korean martial arts place emphasis on the development of the practitioner's spiritual and philosophical being. A common theme in most Korean styles, such as taekwondo and hapkido, is the value of inner peace in a practitioner, which is stressed to be only achievable through individual meditation and training. The Koreans believe that use of physical force is only justified for self-defense. Japanese martial arts can be classified as Budo. The suffix do indicates that the martial art is a path to a correct and full life, and that physical training is meant to achieve a spiritual improvement. Now, wrestling is the oldest hand-to-hand combat sport. Belt wrestling was depicted in works of art from Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt around 300 BC, and later in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh. The earliest known depiction of boxing comes from a Sumerian relief in Mesopotamia from the 3rd millennium BC. The foundation of modern East Asian martial arts and South Asian martial arts is likely facilitated by cultural exchanges of early Chinese and Indian martial arts. During the Warring States period of Chinese history, about 480 to 221 BC, extensive development in martial philosophy and strategy emerged, as described it by Sun Tzu in The Art of War, about 350 BC. Legendary accounts link the origin of Shaolin Quan to the spread of Buddhism from ancient India during the early 5th century CE, with the figure of Bodhidharma to China. Written evidence of martial arts in southern India dates back to the Sangam literature of about the 2nd century BCE to the 2nd century AD. In Europe, the early sources of martial arts traditions date to ancient Greece. Boxing and wrestling were represented in the ancient Olympic Games. Similarly, the Romans produced gladiatorial combat as a public spectacle. A number of historical combat manuals have survived from the European Middle Ages. This includes such styles as sword and shield, two-handed sword fighting, and other types of melee weapons besides unarmed combat. Among these are transcriptions of Johannes Lichtenauer's poem on the longsword dating back to the late 14th century. I suppose I'll have to look that one up sometime. I can't say I've read many poems about swords. Likewise, Asian martial arts became well documented during the medieval period. For instance, Japanese martial arts began with the establishment of the samurai nobility in the 12th century. The mid to late 19th century marks the beginning of the history of martial arts as modern sports developed out of earlier traditional fighting systems. In Europe, this includes the development of boxing, wrestling, and fencing as sports. In Japan, the same period marks the formation of the modern forms of judo, jiu-jitsu, karate, and kendo, among others, based on revivals of old schools of Edo period martial arts which had been suppressed during the Meiji Restoration. Western interest in Asian martial arts arose during the end of the 19th century due to the increase in trade between the United States with China and Japan. Relatively few Westerners actually practiced the arts, considering it to be mere performance. Edward William Barton Wright, a railway engineer who had studied jiu-jitsu while working in Japan between 1894 and 1897, was the first man known to have taught Asian martial arts in Europe. He also founded an eclectic style named Bartitsu, which combined jiu-jitsu, judo, wrestling, boxing, savate, and stick fighting. As Western influence grew in Asia, a greater number of military personnel spent time in China, Japan, and South Korea during World War II and the Korean War, and were exposed to local fighting styles. Jiu-jitsu, judo, and karate first became popular among the mainstream from the 1950s to the 1960s. Due in part to Asian and Hollywood martial arts movies, most modern American martial arts are either Asian-derived or Asian-influenced. The term kickboxing was created by the Japanese boxing promoter Osamu no-guchi for a variant of Muay Thai and karate that he created in the 1950s. American kickboxing was developed in the 1970s as a combination of boxing and karate. Taekwondo was developed in the context of the Korean War in the 1950s. The later 1960s and 1970s witnessed an increased media interest in Chinese martial arts, influenced by martial artist Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is credited as one of the first instructors to openly teach Chinese martial arts to Westerners. World Judo Championships have been held since 1956, and Judo at the Summer Olympics was introduced in 1964. Karate World Championships were introduced in 1970. The Kung Fu wave of Hong Kong action cinema in the 1970s, especially Bruce Lee films, popularized martial arts in global popular culture. Now, a number of mainstream films produced during the 1980s also contributed significantly to the perception of martial arts in Western popular culture. These include The Karate Kid in 1984, Bloodsport in 1988, and many others. But of course, The Karate Kid has enjoyed a revival with Cobra Kai, the hit television series. It was quite good, I have to say, and felt both nostalgic and fresh, a difficult combination. Anyway, the era in the 70s and 80s produced some Hollywood action stars with martial arts backgrounds, such as Jean-Claude Van Damme and Chuck Norris. Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee were also prominent martial artists who became major movie stars. Their popularity and media presence has been at the forefront for promoting Chinese martial arts in the Western world since the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Testing or evaluation is important to martial artists of many disciplines who wish to determine their progression or their own skill level in specific contexts. Students often undergo periodic testing and grading by their own teacher in order to advance to a higher level of recognized achievement, such as a different belt color or title. The type of testing used varies from system to system, but may include memorizing a series of movements or forms, and/or sparring, and even a written test. Martial arts training aims to result in several benefits to trainees, such as their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Through systematic practice in the martial arts, a person's physical fitness may be boosted. Strength, stamina, speed, flexibility, movement coordination, etc., as the whole body is exercised and the entire muscular system is activated. Beyond contributing to physical fitness, martial arts training also has benefits for mental health, contributing to self-esteem, self-control, and emotional and spiritual well-being. For this reason, a number of martial arts schools have focused purely on therapeutic aspects, de-emphasizing the historical aspect of self-defense or combat entirely. Bruce Lee viewed martial arts as an art form, emphasizing that it involved not only physical mastery, but also emotional and mental expression. Through fluidity, balance, and spontaneous reaction, martial artists communicate emotionally, transcending mere technique and transforming combat into a deeply personal and expressive form of communication. Hundreds of millions of people worldwide practice some form of martial art. Web Japan, which is sponsored by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, claims there are 50 million karate practitioners worldwide. The South Korean government in 2009 published an estimate that Taekwondo is practiced by 70 million people in 190 countries. But as I was thinking about all this, it was all knowledge and theory, but now it was pretty much time for the practical application. Anyway, that's what I thought as 50 minions rushed me while Professor P giggled. My ex-wife Julia just stood there, looking like she wanted to say something, but couldn't. It was okay. I knew why now. I immediately activated umbrella number 6, like I said, my force field umbrella, and protected Bradley and myself. I was knocking minions back pretty easily, and they kept rushing us, and then bouncing back off the force field, repeatedly, with some of them not quite bright enough to figure out what was happening. But that's the thing about minions. You're not really paying for an IQ score. Dolores, however, needed no such protection. She was like a whirlwind and cut through the untrained minions quite easily. Professor P saw this and was not pleased. He didn't realize Dolores was a mercenary until now. And that's what makes her so effective. She makes an effort to look casual all the time. But if she's actually assuming a martial arts fighting stance, that's when you really need to watch out. Dolores continued to fight off the minions with a few acrobatic spin kicks that I had only seen before in movies, so it was quite impressive. I was keeping Bradley and myself safe with my force field umbrella, but although we were fending off the minion assault for now, we still ran the risk of running out of energy, me with my umbrella and Dolores with her martial arts. Although I admit, on every adventure, I have yet to see her tired, but I knew this battle would test even her limits of endurance. Professor Roughhouse saw Dolores tear through the minions like paper and was also not pleased. He was going to take matters into his own hands. He left finishing the stealing of my Wets propulsion system to Dapper Science John, and with a smile, joined the fray. Unfortunately, it looked like melee combat was also in Professor Roughhouse's wheelhouse. He approached Dolores and they both smiled at each other before engaging. And I will tell you all about how the battle went next time, but before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. Look, I've said it before, as much as I don't like conflict, sometimes it's unavoidable. I mean, if a science villain is sending waves of minions after you, all you can do is put up your umbrella-based force field and send your assistant's mercenary girlfriend after them. Now, I suppose that's a very specific case, but my point is the overall ideas apply universally. If you're ever backed into a corner, you have to fight. It will be unpleasant, but just remember what you're fighting for. It could be for friends, family, yourself, or to prevent the amphibious invasion of tropical islands that rely on tourism and not being invaded. Never just fight to fight, but when you do have to fight, remember why you are fighting. It will give you motivation and fuel your passion as well as your soul. So I wish you Godspeed and victory, adventurers, in whatever battle you may be facing. Good night.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.